In our yesterday's class, we have looked at the basic terminology that we'll be using in Salesforce. We had a look at the comparison between the Salesforce classic view versus the Lightning experience. And towards the end, we have understood the process of creating a Salesforce Developer Edition org. And at the end, I have asked you a question which is nothing but what if I need to save the information in Salesforce? Right. So we have discussed that there's a concept called object, which we'll be using in terms of saving that information. All right. Now, what exactly is a sales? What exactly is an object? According to the definition of Salesforce, according to the definition that is given by Salesforce for the object, it is nothing but a data table that allows us to store data specific to the organization in Salesforce. All right. So what it says is, all right. If you see here, this definition can be broken down into two pieces. One is saying that object is nothing but a database table that allows us to store data. That is one piece. And the second piece is it is very specific to the org or the organization in Salesforce. That means whatever the data that I save in my org or the organization would remain in my org. So that means without me doing anything, whatever the data that I save in my org remains within my org. Let's say if somebody is creating a new org and creating some data in it, that data is very specific to the org. That helps us understand that data that we are saving in the org is protected in terms of saying that it remains within the org and only the people who have access to it can see it. All right, so that is the security aspect of the security aspect part of this definition, which talks about whatever the data that I create in my org remains within my org. Right. The first part of the definition talks about it's a data table. In case if you have worked with any database, any kind of a data tables, you might have aware that there is a table that we call which also does the same thing. Right. In case if you have not worked with Oracle or any kind of a database um, languages in terms of database technologies in terms of saving that information, we can simply compare this definition with our Excel sheet. Right, so let's quickly jump to our Excel sheet for quick exercise and then we can come back and understand the other points related to our object. So I'm sharing my Excel sheet. Let me know if you guys can see it. All right. Now, if you see here, we usually use Excel sheets to save information. And what exactly, let's say if I have to save the information that we have talked about yesterday, the people who are joining for the training, right? If I take the requirement of the same thing in our Salesforce, let's say there are a couple of users who are about to use our production org. We need to save their information in Salesforce, having a condition that whether they have completed the training or not. So how do I save that information? The first column that I would be creating is name column, followed by email address. These are all the details that I would be capturing from them, right? And let's say phone, then followed by city. Now if you see here, I have created columns for a specific reason where column A captures the name of the person who is attending that training and column B talks about the email addresses of the people who have joined the training. Same is with your column C for phone number, D is for your country, and E is for capturing the city of that user who has joined for that training. Now, if I want the individual details, where I'll be looking at, I'll be looking at the row side of it. If I want collective information, I'll be looking at the column side. If I want the individual details, what is his name, what is his email address, what is his phone, what is his country, and what is his city, then I'll be looking at a row level. Right. So let's take some dummy data in here. So phone number, we can put it as random phone number, city as, let's say, India. Sorry, country is still India. Now, if you see here, we have basic details of a person. Now, if there are multiple people, what would happen? These entries would continue like this. If I want the entire details, I'll be looking at a column. If I want an individual details, I'll be looking at a row. Is this point clear to everyone? How we use our Excel sheet in terms of creating the data? Right, awesome. We have been doing the same thing for quite a while. In case if you have worked with Excel sheet, you might have already done this one. The important point here is we are looking at a row for the individual information. We are looking at a column for all the people who have joined the training. Now, if I take this understanding back to Salesforce, right? Now, in the database, in the normal databases, you would have columns and you would have rows, just like how we discussed in our Excel sheet. Now, in Salesforce, how is that terminology being used? We would call the column as field. You would call that column as field and the row as record. Column as field and the row as a record. From going forward, in case if I'm calling it as a record, consider that we are taking the entire details of that entry. We are looking at the entire details that are being entered on that object. And if I have, in case if I'm calling about, if I'm saying about, or if I'm using the word called field, compare that with your column example that we have discussed. Column is replaced with your field, and whereas the row is replaced with your record. So that is the difference between the terminology of how you use that in your database and how we use that in our Salesforce object. Now, is that point clear to everyone? Awesome. Now, what are the classifications or what exactly do we have in terms of what exactly is the classifications that we have in object? We have two types of objects, one being the standard object and other being the custom object. Now, if you ask me what is the reason for classifying these objects into two, right? So what is the criteria that Salesforce has considered in terms of creating these categories? The reason for that is if Salesforce has already given you an object, that is where we call that as a standard object. Remember, we have talked about that Salesforce is directly providing a solution to us. In case if you need, you can go ahead and customize it or create that application according to your requirement. So since it is already providing a solution, there should be some setup in terms of saving that information, correct? So that setup which is coming from Salesforce, which is helping us to save information, that is done through the standard objects, right? If Salesforce is giving that object for us, that is called as a standard object. If we are going ahead and creating one object for our requirement, that becomes your custom object. As the name suggests, we are doing a custom object here for our requirement, right? So that is the differentiation between the objects that we have. We have standard objects and we have custom objects. You might be wondering, how do I differentiate them? So there is a field called API name, where towards the end of this API name, if you see underscore underscore C underscore underscore C as a value or a suffix or kind of a end of the object, if it has underscore underscore C towards the end of it, that is where it's called as a custom object. What does the C stands for? C stands for custom, right? So that is an indication that we are looking at a custom object. Do not worry. Once we create an object, we'll go ahead and see where exactly we can find this API name and where do we find this underscore underscore C part. So that way we can say that it is a custom object or a standard object. All right. Now, a quick question to everyone in terms of the classification of the object, can we create a standard object? Answer can be yes and no. Feel free to put that in the chat window. The question is, can we create a standard object? Put in Y if you agree, put in N if you don't think so it can be created. Awesome, we have a mixed response. So the answer is, since the standard objects are the objects that are given by Salesforce, we do not have that luxury of creating another standard object. But what we can create, we can go ahead and create a custom object, right? So we cannot go ahead and create a standard object, but we can go ahead and create a custom object, right? When do you create a custom object? In case if the existing standard objects are not serving your purpose, that is where you will go ahead and create a custom object. That is a metric, or that is a scale that you would consider in terms of deciding whether you have to go with your custom object or with your standard object. All right, go ahead, Amr.
So Sandeep, so when you create a custom object,
Yeah.
does it get stored? Like, does it get saved within the Salesforce server
Yeah.
so that other people can access this custom object?
All right. So if I have to give you a very basic answer, considering everyone where we are, the answer is whatever the object that you create in your org is very specific to your org.
Okay.
All right. So that means in case if you have created your org, if you go ahead and create a custom object there, only you or the people who have access to your org can see it. Now, when you ask that point, the other point which talks about if I have some data in my object, can others also see it? If you want to allow them to see it, then they can. There are multiple ways of doing it. We'll discuss that in our coming classes. But the idea is, if you do not do anything, if you have created a custom object and you have entered some data in it, it is only specific to your org and to the people who are allowed to access your org.
Okay. So it's not like once we create a custom object, it can become a standard object later. Nothing like that, right?
No. See, the thing is, the standard objects are objects at the end of the day. Because Salesforce is giving that to us, that is why we are calling them as standard objects. Because for a solution to work, there should be some mechanism to save that information that has been entered by the user, right? So that is why we are considering them, or we are calling them as standard objects. And anything that has not been provided by Salesforce, and you have to create, you want a ability to save some information in Salesforce, not in the data model that is being provided by Salesforce, but a model that you want to create for yourself. That is where you would go ahead and create your custom object and say that this is how I would like to save my information in Salesforce. As simple as that.
Thanks.
Right? Awesome. Now, so we have gone through the couple of details in terms of object. Let's do a quick exercise of what we have done in our Excel sheet. So the sheet that contains our information, we call it that as object in Salesforce. The headings that we have added to our columns are called fields. Columns are fields in our Salesforce. And the entries that we have, the single entry that we have under one column are called as field values. Under a field, you would provide a value. That is why we call it as a field value. Together, this entire section, including your fields, is called as a record. Right? So row in your database or in your Excel sheet, a record in Salesforce. Right? So we have two entries here. So we have two records under this object. Right? Keep this diagram in mind, so that way whenever you feel like you are kind of lost, not able to understand the terminology, feel free to go back to this diagram or this diagram, so that way you can understand the terminology and compare them. Going forward, I'll be using the Salesforce terminology, so that way you get used to that terminology and it would be easier for you to grab the point that the person is saying once you get into your projects. All right. Now, we have looked at why we need an object. We have looked at what exactly is an object. We have discussed the categories that we have in objects. We have compared the terminology between our Excel sheet or our database table with our Salesforce object terminology, now is the high time where in which we need to jump into our Salesforce org and start creating which object do we create, or which object can we create in Salesforce org? Standard custom. Which object can we create in Salesforce org? Awesome. It's a custom object that we can create, right? Again, this is a point that you need to remember. Standard objects cannot be created. It is all the custom objects that we would create. Now, how do you navigate to a page where you can go ahead and create your custom object, right? So remember that we have talked about setup menu, the gear icon at the top. So first step is to click on your setup. And a quick suggestion, in case if you wanted to take some notes, grab a pen and paper and start taking notes. So that way it would be easier for you to refer whenever you need to, right? Now, the first step is to click on the gear icon and click on the setup, right? So once you click on the setup, this is how it looks like. Now, if you remember, the starting point of our discussion yesterday was like something like this, right? We have seen the screen. I'm just loading that screen. So you have seen this screen, something of this sort. In order to go to that setup page, you need to click on this gear icon. This gear icon would be available for you. Click on the setup, and that is where it would look like this. Now, how do I go ahead and create a custom object, or how do I go ahead and look at the existing objects that are there in Salesforce? That is where you have this object manager tab, right? Object manager tab. In here, if you click on this one, that is where it would take you to this object manager. What is the job of this object manager? Anything that is related to the object, you can go ahead and do that in here. Now, these are the list of objects that are there in my org, right? So if you see here, few of the names under this column called API name are not with __c, right? So these objects are coming in from the Salesforce itself when I create that org. There are few objects that I have created for my requirement purpose. Those are marked as __c at the end of the object name or the API name. So the C stands for custom, and you can see that from here. The type of the object is a custom object. The ones that we does the objects which doesn't have __c at the end, they are called standard objects. Is that making sense? The differentiation between the custom object and the standard object. How do we identify them? Once we actually look at the list of objects that are being presented to us. All right, cool. Now, since we have understood how do we identify a standard object and a custom object, let's go ahead and see how exactly we can create a custom object. Now, if you see here, there is a create drop down that we have at the top, and you need to select the custom object here. Once you have clicked on it, this is how it looks like. All right, so it is asking couple of pointers or couple of information from us. Let's understand what exactly do we need to provide in here. And the second thing is what fields are important or what fields are mandatory and what fields are not. By now you might have guessed it, right? If you see here, there is a red line beside that field or a text area. If you see a red pipe or a line like this, that is marked as a required field. You cannot skip these fields or you cannot skip these values without entering information in here and clicking on save. You cannot do that. You will be presented with an error, right? So how many required fields or required values that we need to present? 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5. So 5 values we need to enter in terms of creating a custom object. Let's start with the first one. So what is the first value talking about? It is talking about what would you like to give a name to your object is what it is asking. Example that we have here is, so they are giving an example saying that account is an example of an object label name, right? So since we are talking about the training, right? So let's name our object as trainee, and also let's make sure that we are saying as prod trainee, right? So since I'm creating this object, so that way I can capture the information of the users who are getting trained for that, getting trained to use a production environment. So that is why I'm naming them as prod trainee, right? So if you see here, as soon as I enter that information, there is one more field that got automatically populated. We'll just talk about this one after completing this, the second field that we have. Now, what is the second field talking about? It is talking about giving a label to that object in a plural format. If you are wondering why do we need to give a label and also a plural label to it, the answer is, in your object, is it just one record that you will enter? Is it multiple records that you would enter? Is it just one row you would enter, or is it multiple rows under a data table that you are planning to enter, right? So it is not just one record or one row that you would be entering in a data table. It is more than one record mostly. So if there is more than one record, it makes more sense to call that in a plural form rather than a singular form. That is why we enter a plural form to our object as well. How do you do that? Simply get the name of your object and put an S at the end of it, like how this example is demonstrating, right? So once I have completed that step, that is where we can move on to the next field, which is mandatory, which is an object name. In case if you are wondering what exactly is this starts with a vowel sound, in case if your object starts with a vowel sound, you will check this checkbox. If it doesn't, feel free to ignore this checkbox. Now, if you ask me why does it matter whether my object is starting with a vowel sound or not, it is basically meant for how your objects would be kind of, it is like a searching mechanism that might happen in the behind the scenes. So that is why there is a field that we have, say that is where the field that has been exposed by Salesforce in terms of getting an input from us. Are we good so far on these two fields that we have, which are mandatory label and a plural label? It is just the object name that we are specifying here. Are we good so far? Awesome. Now, if you see here, there is an object name that got auto-populated. How it got auto-populated, it took the label, and wherever there is a space, it has converted that space into an underscore. If you see here, there is a space that we have used, and that space is converted into an underscore here. Now, what is the job of this object name? It basically does two jobs. One, it checks if there is a similar object with the same name. One, it checks if there is a similar object in Salesforce, within my Salesforce org with the same name. If yes, it would throw me an error saying that there's a duplicate object with the same name already exists in your object, right? With some kind of a similar verbiage, it would tell me that it would indicate that this object is already present in the system. When it would happen when I click on save. The other job of this one is this name would be considered to create the API name of our object. If you remember, I have shown you the list of API names which had the object name followed by underscore underscore C. So how is that value being populated? It is taking the label, converting that space into an underscore, and it appends underscore underscore C to this value. So if I save this object, my API name for this object would be prod underscore trainee underscore underscore C. Right, so the importance of your object name is it makes sure that there are no duplicate objects, and two, it helps us create the API name for our object. Right, so that is the importance of this object name. Did we follow that point? Are we all on the same page? I'm just double checking. Since this is the first time that we are touching Salesforce, I'm just validating if we are all on the same page. In case if you agree that we are all on the same page, I can just check once I complete a point, right? So I'm just making sure that we are all good so far. Since we are good, let's proceed on to the next thing. If you see here, there's a description field that is presented to us, even though it is not mandatory. As a best practice is something that which would help your job, your job and the people who are working in the same or job easy. Why is it so? If I randomly create an object and do not provide any background information regarding this object, no one would be able to understand why do we use this object. So that is where it makes sense to provide the description in this field or provide some info in this description field, so that way anybody looking at this object would understand the purpose or the reason why we have created this object, right? So let's name this object, let's provide some information to this description field saying that created this object to capture the production details. So this is the reason why we have created this object. Just by reading this statement, at least you got to know why we are using this object. Even though it is not a mandatory field, whenever you have a description field, feel free to fill that information, so that way it provides some background to the other people who are working within that org. Right? It is not just you and me who will be working in a project, it would be multiple developers working together. Every time you cannot go to everyone saying that this object is created for this purpose. Rather, you can put that in the description, and that description would help others to understand why we have created this object for. Right? So there are a couple of other fields that are not important at this point of time. Let's jump to a section where we need to focus on the required fields that we need to fill in for creating our object. Now, if you see here, it is saying that enter record name, label, and format. Now, it is asking me, how are you planning to create your record name field? Right. So if you see here, there is a field that got auto-populated, field name that got auto-populated, and it is asking me the data type. Now, what is this data type? If you remember our discussion from our Excel sheet, we have created name field, phone number field, email, city, and country field. If you look at this data, name field would be in a text information. Phone number would be in numbers. Email would be a combination of your alphanumeric characters. And your city and country would have some text information. So that means every column would have some kind of a data segregation, right? One column could be a text field. Another column could be a number field. Another column, let's say if I am taking a quantity as a field, right? So quantity could be 1, 2, it's a number field, right? So depending on what kind of a data that we enter, we decide or we tell the Salesforce that this is the data type for that particular field that I'm looking at. Right? So data type is something that helps the Salesforce understand what kind of a data or the information that we are entering under that column or under that field. Right? So here it is asking me, do you want to create a text field or do you want to create an auto number field? Now, when you would go with your text and when you would go with your auto number, in case if there is a name field that you want to capture, a text information where you do not want any kind of a unique number, that is where you would go with the text option in here. In case if you want a number, auto number to be generated, that is where you will go with an auto number field. Now, if you ask me what is an example for this auto number, so in case if you have raised any case, right? So with the customer care service, they would provide you with a number saying that this is your case number or this is your ticket number. That number is unique, which would help you understand that there is an issue that has been created under your name. Whenever you need an update on that issue, what you can do, you can share or you can call in that customer care service asking for an update on that particular case or that ticket. Or in a simpler example, in case if you have not raised any case and if you have not got any number for that ticket that you have raised, if you have gone into a restaurant, right, and had some good food, at the end of the day will present you with a bill. In that bill, they will not give your name, but rather that bill would have a number. It would have a sequence number saying that on this particular table, these are the items that you have had, right? And it would have a bill number at the top. The bill number is a unique number that generates every time that person, the cashier guy, says that like this items are being consumed at our end and this is the bill for that particular table. So it is a unique number that gets generated, right? So they would not ask our details, but they would use that bill number to differentiate which table had the items that they have consumed, right? So unique, whenever there is a need for having a unique number that gets generated or a unique sequence number that needs to be generated, that is where you will go with your auto number as an option. In case if you do not need such options, then you can go with your text field, right? So text field, we can text field is a direct approach. We do not need to know much about it. If I select the text option in here, we do not have to provide anything. You just need to click on save. Everything would be done, right? You can go ahead and create your custom object. Since auto number needs further discussion, I'm selecting an auto number here. Now, if you ask me, do we have a requirement where we need to create an auto number? The answer is yes, because every time if I have to say that this person has completed that course, let's say Raju has completed that course. In my system, there could be multiple Rajus. How do I identify them? Again, I need to get their last name. Instead, what I can do, I can generate a unique sequence number saying that Raju with sequence number 001 has completed that course, or a person with 001 number has completed that course. That would be more meaningful in terms of saying Raju completed that course, right? For that reason, I'm going ahead and creating an auto number. In short, you can think this auto number as a roll number that we are giving to our students who are joining a session or joining a school, right? So if you look at the register, you would have a unique sequence number that got generated for every student that is attending that class. The same thing is also your auto number. As in when a person creates a new record, this auto number gets incremented. For time being, we do not see this in action, but once we start creating records under that object, that is where it would make more sense. For time being, let's understand how to create an auto number. Now, how do you create an auto number? There is a display format that you need to set, followed by the starting number. What is the display format? How would you like to create your auto number that gets generated? Right. So best practice is take the initials of your object name. Right. Take the initials of your object name. P and T are my initials for my object name. So I'm taking that, put a hyphen, put a curly brace, and close the curly brace. Within this curly braces, you define how many, from where exactly, how exactly your sequence should look like, right? So let's say if I want the sequence to be like this, pt hyphen, I want the sequence to start like this. If you want the sequence to start like this, that is where you would enter 5 zeros, 1 2 3 4, followed by the fifth digit, which is also 1 in here. So what it helps the Salesforce understand, it helps the Salesforce understand that user is looking for a 5-digit number starting from 0, right? So this is the format that we're giving to Salesforce, saying that you can expect or you have to adhere to this format, right? So this is the format if I have told the Salesforce to create. The other thing the Salesforce is asking me is, from where do I need to start? Do I need to start from 1? Do I need to start from 99? Right? So if I want the Salesforce to start from 1, that is where I can go ahead and write number 1 in here. If I want the Salesforce to start from 9, I can go ahead and provide number 9 in here. What would happen? The sequence that generates for the first record, it would have the sequence as pt hyphen 4 zeros followed by 9. We are deciding how you want to generate that auto number in here. Is this point clear to everyone? It would make more sense once we see this in action. For time being, this is the format that we have given in here. We're asking the Salesforce to follow this 5-digit format, all zeros, and we are asking the system to start it from 1 rather than starting it from 0, right? So other fields are not important at this point of time. We can go ahead and click on save in here. right? I'll click on save. As soon as I do that, there is a new page that gets redirected, and what it says that we have created an object. What is the name of our object? Prod trainee. If you look at the details tab, if you look at this details section, it gives us the details that we have entered in our previous screen. Remember that we have entered the description. We have created the singular name and the plural name. So all the details that we have provided in here is coming up here. Is it a custom object or a standard object? It's a custom object here. And what is the API name? Remember that we have talked about the object name being used for two reasons. If this object gets created, that means there is no other object in my org with the same name. Second important reason for the second important purpose of our object name is to help us create an API name. So if you see here, this is our object name. It got appended with this underscore C at the end. C indicates that it's a custom object, and this is how your API name gets generated, right? So going further, in case somebody asks you the API name, go to your object manager, search for your object, and that is where go to the details section. You will find your API name, right? So that is how you can check your object and the API name related to your object. Now, where do I see the fields that are there in the object? If I go to the fields and relationship section, that is where I'll see a couple of fields. These are the fields or the columns in the data table language. If you see here, we have created one field during the time of creation of our object. So this is the label, this is the API name, and this is the data type. Remember that we have created it as an auto number, right? So we have an auto number field with the name as, with the label as prod trainee name, and the API name is name, right? So you might not know what exactly the API name purpose is yet, but we'll understand that in our coming classes. For time being, label is something that would be displayed to the end user, and this API name is something that we would refer to that field internally, right? For time being, just think about label as something that we would display to the end user. All right. Now we have an object. All right. So we have an object. We have only one field that got created during the time of creation of our object. Now we have also talked about a couple of things during our session, which is starting of our session, which is nothing but we wanted to create a field that holds the name of that particular person. But in this scenario, we have a couple of fields, but we do not have a field that captures the name of the person. All right. What if you have a requirement where you need to capture a detail that is not present in your object? That is where you would go ahead and create another field for your requirement. Before I go ahead and create another field in this object, let's focus on the other three fields that we have. Did I create these fields, or is it something that got generated as soon as I click on save on that custom object? These fields are the fields that got generated as soon as I created that object, right? So what is the purpose of this fields? This created by field tells me when a record has been created. Last modified by field gives me an idea of who has modified that record. And owner field decides who owns that record, right? For time being, we just need to remember these fields, this information regarding these fields. Once we actually create a record, that it would make more sense in terms of how can we use this information that is provided by Salesforce. Just an FYI, we also call these fields as system fields or audit fields because it helps us audit what happened on that particular record, right? So this is just an FYI. Since we have not created a record yet, this information might be little kind of I mean, it takes some time to digest this thought. Once you look at a record, that it would make more sense in terms of understanding these pointers. Right, so let's do the process of creating a field to capture the name of that trainee who is taking this training, right? So how do I create a custom field here? Again, I'm using a word called custom, right? So we are going ahead and creating a custom field for our requirement. If the fields are already being provided by Salesforce, that is where we call them as standard fields. If I am going ahead and creating a custom field, knowing the fact that the fields that are provided by Salesforce are not serving my purpose, that is where I'll go ahead and create a custom field. Whatever the discussion that we had for the object, the same thing applies for your fields also. How do you create a custom field? Under the fields and relationship section, you have a new button which says custom field on hover. When I click on that button, it takes me to a page. So what is the field that I'm interested in creating? I'm creating a field to capture the name of the person who is attending this prod training, right? Now, if you see here, the first step in your creating your custom field is to choose the field type. Now, what is this field type? This field type is also called as a data type, just like how we have discussed in our section in creating our custom object, where it talks about a field being a text or the field being an auto number. What we have discussed there, depending on the data that we are entering under a column, we need to give a heads up to Salesforce that under this column, I am saving the email addresses. Under this column, I'm going ahead and saving the phone number fields. Under this column, I'm going ahead and creating the or saving the name field or the text information. So if I give a heads up to Salesforce, so that is where it would understand what is the data that it can accept. If there is some deviation, if the user is not entering the right information, it would stop the user from entering that information, right? So that is why it is always a best practice in terms of selecting the right data type for your requirement. Now here are the list of data types that we have. For saving the name of a person, what is the right data type that we need to choose? Right, feel free to comment that in the chat window once you see the right data type that we can use. The exercise is, I'll be scrolling down to the end of this page. If you find anything that is relevant for our discussion, right? The discussion of creating a field that can capture the name of the person who is attending the training, broad training. If you find any data type, feel free to put that data type, which is in this column, in the chat window. Is the exercise clear to everyone? Awesome. Right, I'll just start scrolling down. Feel free to look at the data types. And once you identify the right one, put that in the chat window. So we have reached the end of the list of data types that we have. Did you identify any data type that is helpful for our requirement? Awesome. So if you see here, we have a text option which says, again, we have a description in terms of what exactly this data type would do. Allows users to enter any combinations of letters and numbers. Mostly when you are talking about a name, you would not expect people to write in a different, let's say, it will never be in numbers, right? Even though it has numbers in it, we have this text option which is helping us save that information in both letters and numbers. So this is the right data type that we can select for this particular requirement. So once you have identified the right data type, select that data type and click on next. Step number 1 is to select the data type for your requirement. Step number 2 is to enter the details related to your field. So what is the name that I would like to give to my field? I would give a name as prod trainee name. Oh, this might conflict. I'll say trainee name. Right? So since we already have a label as prod trainee name, I'm just removing prod in front of this one. Right? So we have given a label to it. As soon as I do that, just like our object name, there is a field name that gets auto-populated by removing a space. It is creating a value right? So by taking this label, right? So the same story that we have discussed for our object name also applies in here. If there is an existing field with the same API name, it would stop me from saving it, and it also helps us build that API name. So what is the API name that I would be seeing for this field? It would be trainee underscore name underscore underscore C is what it would create if there is no duplicate field with the same name, right? So that is the purpose of your field name, just like your object name. If you know how the object name works, you also know how the field name also works. Between these two fields, there is another field called length, which talks about how much, how many characters do you allow the user to enter in your text field. Is it 20, 30, 40? You decide that number and provide that information in here. I'm putting it a 40 as in saver side, just to be sure that if there is a person which who has a longer name, they should not be affected by this. So that is why I'm putting the number as 40 in here. Again, we have a description field. Even though it is not a mandatory field, let's go ahead and write the purpose for creating this field. So we'll say created capture the name of the. So this is the reason why we are creating this field. We wanted to capture the name of the trainee. Now if you see here, there's a help text in here. Help text is nothing but in case if the user is not sure what they need to do, you can provide an information to them by providing this eye icon like this. On hover, whatever the message that you write in here would be presented to them. So let's say enter your name is what we'll write, right? So enter your name is what we have written in this help text. Remember this point. We can circle back on this point once we actually create a record. Now, if I scroll down a bit, so these pieces are all straightforward. You just need to give a name to your field, which would be displayed to your end user in the label section. And the API name that would be used in behind the scenes would get auto-generated by removing the spaces with the and replacing it with the underscore. We have decided the length, we have given the description, we have given the help text. Now comes the couple of options that Salesforce is asking, which is, do you want to make this field as required? When I say required, just like how we have seen this red mark in here, it says that without entering this field, Salesforce would throw an error and it would not allow me to go on to the next screen. Do you want the same thing to happen for this field? In short, it is asking, does the information under this field is always mandatory that user needs to enter or not? In case if it is a mandatory thing, it's a required thing, then check this checkbox. Always requires a value in this field in order to save a record. If it is not a mandatory information, if it is an optional field, user can enter that information if they have. If they do not have, if they can ignore it, that is where system would continue to save the record without stopping the user from saving that record. If you really want that information, that is where you will check this checkbox. All right. Now, what is the other field that we have or other checkbox that we have? Do you want to make sure that the entries within this column are marked as unique? Right. So in case if you do not want any duplicate entries, if in case if you do not want name to be duplicated, that is where you can check this checkbox wherein which you are saying that nobody should be having a repeated name when they're taking this training. There should not be two Rajus within that column or within that field. Right. So if you want that approach, you can check this checkbox. But ideally, you cannot say the people who are joining the training session, prod training session, right? There could be multiple people with same name. If you restrict them, if you check this checkbox, it will not allow that second person to enter their details. So that is the reason why I'm not checking this checkbox here, right? Oops. That is where I'm not checking the checkbox in here. I'll leave this value as it is. So this external ID and things below it is something that we'll discuss in our coming classes. All right. So for time being, let's leave it as it is. Now click on next. Step number 2 that we have completed talked about the field details that we have entered. Right, so we have decided the data type on step number 1. We have decided the label of our field, and we have decided the length, and we have also mentioned that whether it should be a required field or not. Now comes the third step, right? So if you see here, it talks about the field level security. At this point of time, we do not know what exactly the field level security is. In our coming classes, we'll understand what exactly this field level security is all about, right? For time being, one thing that you would notice is the visible column, all the checkboxes are checked in here. All the checkboxes are checked in here, and I do not have an option to change them. All right. So that is one point that you need to notice. Right. I'm not going ahead and making any changes on this field level security step number 3. I'm leaving as it is how it has been presented, or I'm not making any changes on the screen. I'm leaving this page as it is without making any changes here. Do not worry, we'll come back to this point separately. There is a separate discussion that we need to have in terms of understanding what is this field level security is all about. Now I'm clicking on next here. On step number 4, which says add to the page layout. On this page also, on this screen also, step number 4, I do not have an option to change anything in here. It is just displaying some information. At this point of time, we do not know what exactly page layout is. Do not worry. Again, we have the field level security is something that we'll be discussing under the concept of security aspect of Salesforce. Page layout is a concept, something that we'll discuss in the way that we will present the information to the Salesforce users is what we'll discuss this point again. For time being, since there is nothing that we have to do on this page, I'll just go ahead and click on saving here. So there are 4 steps in terms of creating your field. Once you have completed all your steps, this is how your field will look like. So if you see here, out of these fields, which one is a custom field? This one is a custom field. The reason being we see __ C at the end of the field name, which would help us understand it's a custom field. C stands for custom field, and it is what is the data type for this field? It is a text field which is accepting maximum 40 characters from the user. Did you guys follow how exactly we can create a custom field? Awesome. So we have created an object. Inside that object, we have created a field. Now, how exactly I can enter in information? Yes, we have to still create some fields in terms of completing our requirement, but how do I go ahead and enter information into this object that we have created? There is a setup that we have, but where is the place where I need to go ahead and enter that information, right? So we have the setup in terms of object. We have a field which is basically holding that information, ready to hold that information that the user provides. But where do I feed that information from? So that is where we need to understand another concept called tab. Remember that we have talked about a tab being present on the starting page. So that is what we are trying to understand in here. Now, what is the need for creating a tab? By now, you might have understood we have the object or we have the data model to save the information that is coming from the user, but we need to provide some kind of an interface to the end user so that they can go ahead and enter the information from here. And once it has been saved, it will go ahead and sit in the object that we have created in our fields that we have mentioned to save the information that is coming from the user, right? So coming back to the tab as in definition, tab is a user interface. Like discussed, we are looking for an interface for doing what? For creating a record for a given object, and also to look at existing records that are already in that object. Let's say I have an object. In that object, there could be existing records, and I might have a requirement to create a new record. So this tab as a concept would help me do those 2 things for us. One is to create a new record and also to look at the existing records. All right, so in order for us to test this functionality, let's go ahead and build one tab, right? So that way we can enter some information into it. So how do you create your tab? Go to your setup. In case if you are lost, do not know how to go to setup, feel free to click on the gear icon, click on setup. Step number 1 is to go to the gear icon, click on setup. From there, in the quick find, search for tab. Search for tab. Right under the user interface, you will have tabs. Click on that. All right, so you will be presented with the screen where in which we are creating a custom tab. Right, for the standard tabs or the standard objects, you would already have the tabs created. We are looking for a custom approach or custom object. So that is why it is called as a custom tabs in here. These are the custom tabs that I already have in the system. In case if you want to create a tab for the new object that you have created, you can go ahead and click on new. In order to look at the existing tabs, feel free to scroll down, identify which tab that you want to open, and click on that link. Right. So I want to go ahead and create a new tab for the object that I've created, which is prod training. So I'll go ahead and click on new. Right. So it would ask me which object do you want to create a tab for. So identify the object for which you want to create a tab for. So at this point of time, I am interested in creating a tab for this prod training. I'll select that. And the second step is selecting the tab style. For time being, okay, so you might not be seeing this pop up. 1 second. So there is a pop-up that comes up. I'm just sharing that pop-up at this point of time. Right, so this is how it looks like once I click on that tab style. So tab style is nothing but what is the outfit or how exactly your object should look like. What is the color and the icon that you want to present it with, right? So I'm just selecting one random item in here. So as soon as I select that, the pop-up closes, and on the main screen, this is how it looks like. The tab style would be populated with the look and feel that I've selected from that pop-up. Remember that I've selected a chest piece. So this is the chest piece and this is the look and feel for it. Right. Again, we have a description field. This is something that we can ignore at this point of time. So we can say creating, I'm giving a description as creating the tab for prod trainee object. So step number 1 is to enter the details for your custom object tab. Click on next. All right. Second step is to add to the profiles. Right. At this point of time, we do not know what exactly a profile is. Again, this concept would be covered in our security level discussion of our Salesforce, security aspect of Salesforce, where we'll have a detailed discussion of this profile. Again, on this page, I'm not doing anything. I'm just clicking on next in here. Right? I'm clicking on next in here. On third step also, I'm not doing anything. I'm leaving the system as it is. What is our third step? To add to the custom app. It is asking us, do you want to add to a custom app? I'm saying yes, include this tab in all the apps. On the screen also, I'm not doing anything. I'll simply click on save. Now, what we have done so far, we have created an object. To that object, we have also created a tab. Right, so where is our tab created? So this is our tab that got created. It got created with the details that we have provided. Now, where do I access this tab from? Where do I access this tab from? If you see here, we have this app launcher. Click on this app launcher and start typing in your tab name. See here. You see here, as in when I start typing the tab name, I can see a value under the items. So once I click on it, that is where it would take me to a page where I can go ahead and create a new record or look at the existing records in the system. All right. Now, how do I create a new record? If I click on new button, that is where it would present me with a screen where I need to enter that information, right? If you see here, our prod trainee name is blank. We are not seeing anything in here, but there is another field which says trainee name. And in here, if I hover on this eye icon, it says enter your name. Where is this value coming from? If you go to your field, open that field, custom field that you have created, scroll down to a section where it says help text, that is where this information is been coming from. So in case if you want to provide some information to the end user where it would help them to decide what is the information that they need to enter, you can present an help text information like this. So now I'll go ahead and say, let's say I'll enter it as Raju, right? Now I have an option to save this information. I'll click on save in here. As in when I save this record, that is where all the things that we have done in our object comes into life. If you remember this format that I was talking about earlier, remember this format that we have set up. If I go to the object, right, click on edit, scroll down to a page where, scroll down to the section where we have decided the data type and the display format. What is happening? It is considering this format that we have presented, which is PT-5 zeros. And we have asked the system to start with the number 1 as a first entry. That is what has been expected here. PT-4 zeros and 1. All right. If I do not provide zeros in there, what it would do? It would simply say PT-1. It would not follow this format in here. The extra zeros that we have at the starting, that would not be coming up. That is the only difference in terms of providing this number of zeros in here. Is this auto number point clear? Now, is it something that I have entered this information, or did the system create this information for us? Especially for this entry, it is something that system has created for us. I have not entered it. It is something that is taken care by the system. So do I have an option to edit it? I do not see a pencil icon on this field. If you see here, there is another field which has a pencil icon. This field doesn't have a pencil icon. So the fields that doesn't have a pencil icon are called read-only fields. We can only read that information. We cannot edit them. All right. Now, coming back to the other field that we have where we have entered Raju, we have a luxury to make a change to it. Right. I can say Raju, instead of saying Raju, I can say Sam. Right. So we have the ability to edit that information that we have entered on this name field because it is a editable field. How do you identify a field that is editable? You would see a pencil icon just at the end of that field. Now, we have also talked about one more thing, which is created by field. If I go back to the object, go to the field section, we have a created by field, last modified by field, owner field. If you look at this created by field, it is talking about who has created this record. I have created it. That is why it is coming on my name. And when I have created it, this is the time where in which I've created it. Right. So this is the IST time that I have set in. So that is what it is displaying. Right. Now if you see here, this is the date and time when this record has been created. Now, if you remember, I have made a change in terms of changing the name from Raju to Sam. That has been reflected here. The last modified by talks about who is the last person who has made the change on this record. It gives us the person who has made the change and also when it was made. So the change was made at this time 2 minutes after the record has been created. So that is how your system fields or audit fields helps us to identify what happened on that record. Right. Last but not the least, there is an owner field that is displaying my name again. By default, any record that you have created would be assigned by the owner field with your name if you are not doing any configurations behind the scenes. Right. So we'll talk about this owner field again in our concept called record level security, where you would have much clarity on what exactly this owner field would do. In short, what we have done so far, we have created an object in our class. To summarize things, we have created an object in our class, we have created a field, we have created a tab, so that way we can go ahead and create a new records in the system. And we have also understood the need for creating a tab. If you see here, I have an option to look at all the existing records in the system. If I need, I can go ahead and create a new record again. If I go ahead and create a record for Raju, what would happen? It would create with the PT402. The sequence number keeps incrementing as and when we have a new record. Tab is used for looking at the existing records, and it also helps us create a new record. So we have looked at the tab concept. Once we have a record created, we have talked about what are the things that we see on that record. Right? So that is all the points that we have discussed in our session today. I'll just pause in here to see if there are any questions, so that way we can answer them one by one.
Hey guys, if you like this video, do like, share and subscribe to SFDC Quest.